Fuck. How does he know? How does Dave know about this? My marriage is over, I just know it. The courts will find Dave to be the primary caretaker of our children. He will be awarded custody. I will be a social pariah shunned by virtually everyone in this church-going community, forgiven by the priest with soft words, but with a judgmental look on his face, just as he did with Mary Skelton. She only lasted about 3 months or so after her husband found out about her affair, 3 lonely months when the rest of the community shunned her, even though the priest forgave her. This community really hates cheating spouses. I slammed on the brakes and screeched to a halt, stopping 2 meters away from colliding with a little girl who ran out into the road chasing a ball. She looked to be about 3, about the same age as my Paula. I was driving too fast, too absorbed in my enormous problem. The kid's mother scowled at me from the sidewalk, even though it was her fucking fault for not watching her kid. I looked around and saw that I was near a large park, 5 minutes from home. I suppressed my fears, drove with shaky hands another 200 meters and stopped before hitting someone absent-mindedly. How could Dave even think? No, it's stupid. Once Dave found out I was having an affair, it makes sense that he thought poorly of me and wanted to cover his bases. He may run a small newsroom from home, but that doesn't mean he's stupid. Far from it. As soon as he found out, of course, he thought it wasn't my first case and started doing DNA tests on the kids. But how the hell did he know? And Carl and I had been so careful. Thoughts reminded me of Carl. I picked up my phone and moved on to Carla, if Dave ever asked, a recently started coworker. My motto was to stay as close to the truth as possible. My message, can you talk? As I waited for an answer, I kept kicking myself. Why did I let this smooth-talking little asshole seduce me? No, come on, be honest, it's not fair. The way we slept together the first time wasn't seduction and is completely understandable. It happened when we were out of town. We had just spent 2 whole days negotiating an exhausting deal, celebrated with too much champagne, and fell into bed together. If I had settled on the first case, everything would have been fine. I would have had a secret that I would have regretted until my last day. A serious secret that could only hurt my husband and family. But or should I say, we, alas. We were both gripped by the excitement of sleeping with someone after more than 10 years of marriage. The allure of the illegality of it all, the thrill of the naughtiness. The excellence of realizing that we had cheated on our spouses and successfully hid it from 2 people who knew us so well, or not successfully hiding it, as it turns out. My musings were interrupted by a text from Carl. No, having dinner with Mary and the kids. What's the matter? Well, they say misery loves company. He knows, Dave knows about us. How the hell did Dave find out about this? We were incredibly discreet, only got together when we were away, and that was only if we managed to get adjoining rooms. We never walked through the door of the same room together, always used condoms, even the first time. We behaved completely normally, both in public and when we were at home with our spouses. Zing, damn, Mary is acting normal, so he didn't say anything to her. Do you think he will? How angry is he? I don't know, we haven't talked yet. I ran away as soon as I found out he knew. This time I didn't have to wait long for an answer. Please beg him not to tell Mary, selfish little prick. Screw my marriage while it's none of his business. Asshole, I'll probably tell his wife if Dave doesn't. Like I said, misery loves company. So how did we get discovered? I made sure my love for my husband wasn't compromised, didn't introduce any new positions or techniques I learned from Carl. Fucking chance. Sex with Carl was vanilla and uninspiring. It was smaller, held for less time, and nowhere near as varied as my Dave. In fact, if it hadn't been for the illegality of it all, it wouldn't have lasted the 6 times over the 7 months we'd actually had it. How unlucky that we were discovered before I was about to end our affair after our next trip in 2 weeks. Damn it. Focus, Megan. How we were discovered is irrelevant. We were exposed, and now my husband trusts me so little that he's doing DNA tests on our children. My mind went back 20 minutes to when I got home late, too late to enjoy dinner with my family. Thankfully, Dave worked from home, took the kids to school, and cooked dinner 6 nights a week. I was supposed to cook on Sundays, but I usually went out and got takeout. Let's just say cooking is not one of my strengths. As I walked through the door, I froze at the horrifying sight. Dave is sitting on one of the kitchen chairs with a cotton swab on a stick, wiping the inside of Jillian's, our 5-year-old daughter's, mouth with it. An open sterilized bag lies on the table. Peter, our 7-year-old son, was also standing there, either waiting his turn or already finished. I had read enough stories and watched enough TV shows to know that I was watching the opening act of a DNA test. My initial reaction was rage. How dare Dave think the kids weren't his? I wasn't a whore, or was I? Knowing I needed to think about how best to get over it, I just turned and ran. Just before I did, Dave turned to look at me with a neutral expression. I brought my hands to my cheeks, remembering the sensation of the blood rushing off them, which was a blatant admission of the truth of what the testing had accused me of. 20 minutes later, here I am, reflecting on the destruction of my family and my community. I knew Dave. I knew him as well as he knew himself. As soon as he was ready to confront me, he did so firmly and calmly. He wouldn't want the whole town to know he'd been hornswoggled. If I can't stop him from divorcing me, I'll ask him to do it quietly just to say we're estranged. That way, even if I lose my marriage, I can still stay in town and see my kids, perhaps sharing joint custody. I really do love them. My mind wandered for God knows how long, running through different scenarios of how Dave would react, trying to find the scenario that would allow me to lose the least. Suddenly, I realized that I was reasoning like a defeatist. I'm using my knowledge of Dave and assuming that a breakup would go without saying, and the best scenario would be a quiet divorce. But what if I'm wrong? What if I put myself at Dave's mercy? I tell him about the forgivable first time and the regrettable sequel. He doesn't want a divorce any more than I do. Sure, his faith in me will be shaken, and it will take years for him to fully trust me again. But I'll still have the respectability and support of the community. If you do this, Megan, you'll have to be completely honest with Dave. One whiff of a lie, and you'll get to the curb faster than a fast-footed cheetah. I glanced at my watch. Just under 2 hours had passed since I discovered that I hadn't been as clever at hiding my affair with Carl as I'd thought. 2 hours since I'd gone from being confident in my marriage to fighting for his very life. 2 hours since I'd seen my husband testing my children's DNA had raised my blood pressure 100 points. I quickly typed a message. I'm on my way home to apologize to you for my affair with Carl. Please don't do anything rash. Then slowly headed home in my car. Epilogue of Megan. Well, what happened after that surpassed my worst nightmare. 10 minutes after sending my text message, I made it home. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, Dave jumped out the door, tossed me, "Stay here and watch the kids," and sped off in his car, screaming. I found out later that he headed straight for Carl's house, and when my lover opened the door, broke his nose in one blow, screaming, "You're sleeping with my wife, aren't you?" Those words stopped Carl's wife calling the police. And together with Dave, they learned the whole story as Carl begged them to call him an ambulance. Since Carl said he had been hit and his wife claimed he had hit the wall himself, the police investigation went nowhere. By the time he returned from the hospital, the locks on his house had been changed, and his wife had made an online appointment with a divorce attorney. How do I know all this? Dave came straight home, told me to pack a bag and leave. Taking one look at the fire in his eyes and the bruises on his knuckles, guessing where they came from, I did as he asked, and fled to a mid-range motel. The next day, I saw a bandaged Carl at the bar at breakfast. All hopes that Dave would be quiet came crashing down early in the afternoon when Carl and I were invited into the chief operating officer's office and summarily executed. She didn't cite any morals because our contracts simply stated that she shouldn't hire scumbags like us. Oops. I realized what the immediate future would be like when I called all 3 divorce attorneys in our town, but no one returned my call. When I went to the diner for dinner, the waitress refused to acknowledge my existence. The nail in the coffin lid, however, was when I met with Carl and learned that family, friends, and former co-workers already treated him like a leper. Within 2 days, spurred on by a visit from the motel manager who stated that his establishment was fully booked, yeah right, Carl and I accepted the inevitable and left town. We didn't want to become social ghosts, which we saw Mary Skelton become last year when she was caught cheating. We drove 300 kilometers and started a new life together. It didn't last long. I know I'm probably stating the damn obvious, but when 2 cheaters get together, there is no trust, stupid. I never realized how important trust is in a relationship until tonight when I had to fight the urge to check his phone while he was in the bathroom. By the time I finally worked up the courage to ask Dave if I could go back into town to visit the kids over the weekend, they had all found a replacement for me. He was perfect prey, and once he was on the loose, the vultures, being attractive singles and widows, declared their interest. By the time I cleaned myself up, there was already a nifty set of shoes under Dave's bed. My kids had a half-sister, and they were already calling the other woman Mom. Now that I'm too old to start another family, all I can do is sit and ponder the lonely life ahead of me. Epilogue of Dave. I lie here glancing at the bedside clock, 11:05 p.m. The soft breathing of Ruth lying next to me reminds me of our sexual marathon of the last 2 hours. Damn, sex with someone new after 10 years with the same woman was good. Damn good. We did some things that were borderline inappropriate. Yeah, life is good, but it's a little weird. My wife cheated on me, but before I could mourn the demise of that marriage too much, I was seduced by a younger, prettier, and sexually more adventurous one. The surreal last day of my old marriage still confuses the hell out of me. Maybe if I digest it in my head for the 10,000th time, it will finally make sense. How'd it go? On the last day of my marriage, Megan came running home and without saying a word, just turned around and left again. I heard her car start and drive away. I was busy for a few more minutes and by the time I called Megan's cell phone, it was busy. Finding no sign of her presence, I started putting the kids to bed and they were fast asleep. Unfortunately, the fact that they didn't see their mother before they went to bed was not unusual. I went into the kitchen and was just about to call Megan again when the house phone rang. An unrecognized cell phone number popped up on the display. The next few minutes from memory went something like this. Hi, this is David Brown speaking. Hi, Dave, it's Carl. I knew Carl, of course, he started working with my wife a while back. I had seen him at several work events and was even invited to his housewarming party. What was his wife's name? Rebecca Beck, something like that. Very handsome, well-built, and a couple years younger than Megan and me. Carl, on the other hand, seemed like a bore. Arrogant, smug, he looked down on me. A legend in his own mind. The last person I'd want to talk to after a hard day, which is why my next words probably didn't sound very friendly. Yeah, Carl, what could I do for you? What would it take? I had no idea what he was talking about, and in confusion I remained silent, forcing him to continue. If my wife finds out I've been having an affair with Megan for the last 6 months or so, she'll cut my balls off and I'll lose my kids. So I'll be honest, Dave, what does it take to keep your mouth shut? I don't remember dropping my phone and collapsing to the floor as the crushing news that my loving wife had betrayed me in the worst possible way hit my consciousness. I had suspected nothing and could not believe it. Yet the pleading in Carl's voice was quite compelling. My mind then turned to a recently frequently discussed problem. Why had my wife seemed to have become emotionally distant from me and the kids over the past 6 months or so? Nothing drastic, just definitely something there. I later realized that the first stage of grief, denial, lasted less than 30 minutes. That stage was followed by anger. I was filled with a blind rage that masked the pain of my loss. I still had enough self-control not to snap at Megan. That led to prison. Her lover, however, was a completely different person. As soon as I heard Megan was back, I drove to the asshole's house and with all the anger I had, punched him. The feeling of bones and cartilage breaking under my fist made me smile even now. Carl's forced confession while his blood dripped was completely unnecessary for me, but necessary for his wife. Releasing my anger allowed me to go home and calmly tell Megan to fuck off. Listening to my woman's light snoring in bed, I realized I was no closer to solving the mystery than the last 100 times I'd thought about it. Why had Carl himself sown the seeds of the destruction of his own marriage by confessing to me when I was completely unsuspecting? Once again, I couldn't escape the thought that Megan's strange behavior that night when she'd come home from work and immediately run off without saying a word had something to do with all of this. I replayed that night in my head once more. I made dinner as I always did. Megan confirmed she would be late, so we sat and ate with the kids, chatting as usual. Then it started to clear up. Jillian complained that a spot in her mouth hurt. I grabbed a flashlight, turned her bottom lip down, and saw an ulcer. Walking over to our first aid cabinet, I grabbed a tube of Boniella and one of the individually wrapped cotton swabs, opened, applied, and used the cream as directed. Absolutely nothing to do with the mystery at hand. Heck, I was beginning to suspect I'd never find out. Turning onto my side, I slid my arm under the sleeping beauty's head and cuddled her, kissing the back of her neck gently. She snuggled against me and purred lightly. To hell with the mystery, it was an especially cold December morning when Stuart got into his car's icy cabin. After starting the engine, he warmed it up a little and drove cautiously onto the nearly empty road. Stuart was on his way to a neighboring town to make a deal with a new supplier of auto parts for his store. Recently, he had been unlucky with suppliers, so he hoped that this time the negotiations would go well. Thankfully, Stuart was right this time. He was able to agree on shipments that were supposed to start from the new year. After shaking hands with his new partner, he went outside. Delighted with the successful deal, Stuart decided to stop by a store and buy a gift for his wife, Emily. He pulled up near a shopping center, walked among the many stores, and chose a beautiful watch for Emily with a gold-plated case from an expensive boutique. By the time Stewart left the city, it was already dark and heavy snow had started to fall. Visibility on the road was rapidly deteriorating, and even with the headlights on and the windshield wipers working, it was almost impossible to see anything in the distance. When Stewart drove onto an intersection, he only had time to notice something dark on the left with his peripheral vision. He started to brake, but it was already too late. A heavy logging truck that had jumped onto the highway easily knocked Stewart's car off the road, crushing the driver's side with its huge bumper. "Hey, how are you there? Are you alive?" Stewart struggled to open his eyes and saw through the broken glass the face of an unfamiliar man. The man immediately got busy, tried to open the door, but it didn't budge. Then he ran for a pry bar, and with difficulty, but broke the battered door, and picking Stewart up by the arms, dragged him outside. Stewart gathered his strength, turned his head, looked at his feet, and was horrified that his feet were completely crushed and left bloody tracks in the snow. His last strength left him, and Stewart lost consciousness. He woke up in the hospital. The first thing he did was try to move his toes, and realizing they were gone, moaned in pain and despair. A gray-haired doctor came into the ward, carefully examined his bandaged limbs, and seeing the patient's suffering on his face, said, "Well, calm down, please. It's not as bad as it could have been. You lost a lot of blood, and it's just a miracle that you survived." Emily arrived in the evening, tears in her eyes, as she sat down next to him and took his hand in hers. Stewart looked at her and remembered buying her a watch at the store, and groaned at his own foolishness. "I stopped by the store to buy you a watch. Why couldn't I have just stayed home?" he muttered. "Stewart, everything will be good, don't worry." His wife tried to reassure him, holding his hand tighter. "What's so good about this? Who needs me now?" Stewart said irritably. "Tell Graham to manage the store himself from now on," he added, turning to the wall. After being discharged, Emily suggested that Stewart live in his late grandfather's old house, outside the city, surrounded by nature. Stewart agreed, seeing it as a good idea. Emily packed her husband's things in a suitcase, and one more time offered to hire a caregiver for Stewart, but he angrily refused. He got out of bed to show her that he could take care of himself, but a sharp pain in his lower back forced him back onto the bed. Gritting his teeth to keep from screaming in pain, he made another attempt and moved to his wheelchair, showing his wife that he didn't need anyone's help. With a proud look, he left the room. Everything in his grandfather's house was as simple as ever, but beautiful in its own way. Stewart gazed at his grandfather's portrait, and suddenly remembered what he was like when he was alive. Although it had been 5 years since his passing, Stewart still vividly remembered his grandpa. He remembered his face, overgrown with stiff bristles, and his old crumpled work shirt, stained with gasoline and tobacco. He wore it all the time, taking it off only for washing. Grandfather died 5 years ago, but Stewart still missed him. These memories took him back to the distant past. He remembered the times when his mother was still alive, before she was diagnosed with cancer. Every morning she used to make him pancakes and carrot fritters, which he loved. It all felt so close now that Stewart completely withdrew into himself and sat in his wheelchair, hypnotized. "Stewart, are you even listening to me?" Emily called out to him. "I might be leaving soon. Don't miss me too much. I'll be back. And call me if you need anything, okay?" Stewart nodded. "Don't forget about me while you're gone," he joked, but his wife flinched at his words. "How can you say that?" Emily said, offended. Then she kissed her husband goodbye and left quietly. Stewart watched as the heavy door closed behind his wife, and at that moment it seemed to him that he had lost her for the last time. He instinctively jerked forward, but a sharp pain pierced his back, and he, groaning, wearily sank into his wheelchair. A month passed. At first Emily called Stewart almost every day, inquiring about his health, offering help, but then her calls became less frequent and finally stopped altogether. Stewart, in a troubled foreboding, tried to reach Emily himself, but her phone did not answer. Stewart guessed that Emily had left him and decided to live her own life, so he soon gave up his attempts to contact her. Deep down he understood his wife, because not everyone can find the strength to take on such a heavy burden as him, but resentment firmly settled in his heart and did not give him peace, neither day nor night. One evening, lost in troubled thoughts, Stewart suddenly heard the gate creak outside. He looked out the window, but it was already quite dark outside, and he didn't see anyone. Thinking that he had imagined it, he was about to immerse himself in his thoughts again, but then he clearly heard a knock on the door. "It's open, come in," Stewart called out, wondering who could come to visit him at this time. The door opened and, to his surprise, Stuart saw his neighbor, Penelope, standing on the threshold. She was petite, slender, and modestly dressed. He looked her up and down and gestured for her to sit at the table. The girl walked timidly into the room and sat down opposite. "Hi, Stuart," she said. "I was passing by and saw the lights in the window, so I decided to stop by. How long have you been here?" "It's been a month. I just haven't left the house," Stuart said gloomily as he rolled out from behind the table, demonstrating his wheelchair. "What happened to you?" Penelope exclaimed concernedly. Stuart wearily waved his hand and told Penelope the story. He had barely finished when they heard a noise from outside, and then someone, drunk, started calling out for Penelope rudely. "Is that your stepfather?" Stuart asked. The girl sadly nodded and explained that her stepfather had been drinking heavily for a long time, almost lost his mind, and life with him at home had become unbearable for her. Penelope could have gone to the city to study, but without money it was impossible, and there was nowhere to earn money in the village. Shivering from the cold, Penelope approached the stove to warm her hands and turned to Stuart. "Can I stay with you tonight? I'm scared to go back home." "He'll definitely beat me," Stuart nodded and suggested that Penelope choose any place she felt comfortable. While wincing in pain, he approached the stove and removed a pot of potatoes from the burner. Seeing Stuart's anguish, Penelope took the pot from him and helped set the table. "You need to see Mr. Khazard," she advised. "People come from all over the region to see him. He'll fix your back right away." "That sorcerer," Stuart laughed, recalling old Mr. Khazard living in the forest. "He's a healer," Penelope corrected him sternly. "Last summer I dislocated my leg and he fixed it so well that there wasn't even a trace left." Stuart waved his hand, promising to visit Mr. Khazard somehow, and suggested Penelope distract herself from the conversation and finally have dinner. A month passed. Penelope visited Stuart every day, helped with the household chores, chatted with him over a cup of tea, and once brought Mr. Khazard to his place. He immediately examined Stuart, running his fingers over his spine and pressing on one of the vertebrae so hard that Stuart almost passed out. Mr. Khazard told him to endure a little and repeated his manipulations several more times. "Done," he said, patting Stuart gently on the back. "It won't hurt you anymore." Stuart smiled incredulously, but within a few hours he realized that he really felt better. Within a couple of days he could easily turn his torso, bend and straighten his back, and even while sitting in his wheelchair he could do housework. He went out to the garden for the first time and put the plot in order, and didn't even feel tired. Returning to the house, he realized for the first time in months that there were pleasant moments in life. But before he could enjoy this new feeling, he was startled by the unexpected sound of the phone ringing. It was Martha, Emily's sister. She struggled to find the right words for a while, but eventually she gathered the courage to tell Stuart that Emily had decided to file for divorce. Stuart was stunned and didn't know what to say. It seemed to him that the remnants of his world had collapsed into an abyss, taking his hope with it. "Why?" he managed to say after a long silence. "They're planning to get married," Martha said, embarrassed. Stuart felt like he couldn't breathe. He asked Martha to cool back, and after turning off his phone, threw it into the corner of the room. Slowly, he walked to his grandfather's old chest of drawers, opened the top drawer, and took out an antique straight razor with a beautiful bone handle. Stuart ran his finger along the blade to make sure it was still as sharp as it was years ago, and started to think. He imagined himself making just one thin cut, and finally getting rid of the pain in his heart. Bitter thoughts, loneliness at night, and endless suffering. Someone knocked on the gate, and fast footsteps approached. Penelope appeared on the threshold with a large bundle in her hands. "Are you out of your mind, Stuart?" she shouted. "Don't even think about it," she cried, rushing towards him, and snatching the razor from his hand. "Why? Why did you want to do that? Everything was so good. Are you kidding at me? You all say that, but in reality you pity me. What good is it to be without feet, and not be able to live my life to the fullest?" He shouted, and hit his stumps with all his might. Penelope froze in horror and helplessness, not knowing how to react. Then she suddenly came to her senses, and unfolded the bundle she had brought with her. 2 prostheses and crutches fell out onto the floor. "This is what Aunt Helen asked you to deliver," stuttered Penelope, and kneeling down, she attached the prostheses to Stuart's legs. "These are left from her late husband." Penelope helped Stuart to stand up, handed him the crutches, and he, unsteadily, moving on his artificial legs, took a few steps. "Well done. See how great it is." Penelope rejoiced, tenderly observing every movement of Stuart. Stuart walked around the room, took a breather, and approached the girl. Thank you. It's really not bad at all. He smiled and held Penelope close to him. The girl immediately hugged Stuart by the neck and kissed him. Regaining her senses, she recoiled in fear, but Stuart managed to grab her by the waist, pulled her close, and running his hand through her lush hair, brought the girl's face so close that their lips met again in a hot kiss. That night they spent together, for the first time as a couple. A week later, Stuart went to the city to divorce his wife and check on the business of the store. The divorce procedure went quickly, and Stuart, dryly saying goodbye to his ex-wife, quickly left the registry office. Emily tried to stop Stuart to ask for forgiveness, but he did not even look at her and walked past, tightly squeezing the crutches. Stuart called a taxi and went to the store. Entering inside, he looked around confusedly. The store was empty. There were some crumpled boxes and old, unsold parts lying on the dusty showcases. Stuart approached Graham, bent over the cash register, and hit the floor with a crutch with force. Graham looked up and recoiled in horror. Stuart, if you're about Emily, then she. He started speaking nervously. I'm not interested in those details. Stuart interrupted him. I came about the store. I see things are not going well. Graham collected all the bills and small coins in the cash register, put them in a bag, and handed them to Stuart. We need to sell the store, he said. There are no buyers, no profits, only expenses. It's not up to you to decide. This is my store, and I will decide what to do with it. And believe me, I can handle this problem. Stuart sharply replied, and left the store without saying goodbye. Stuart was sorry for his business. He had put great effort into the store, but there was nowhere to take the money for investing in it. The only solution could be a loan from the bank, but he doubted that he would be approved. At home he shared his doubts with Penelope, and the girl suddenly, as if remembering something, looked at him with wide-open eyes, and then, asking him to wait a little, ran out onto the street towards her house. She returned in a few minutes, and handed Stuart a large black key, clearly of antique workmanship, decorated with intricate carving. Your grandfather asked me shortly before his death to keep this key and give it to you. I often came to see him, and he always talked about you. He also asked to pass on this key as from the chest that is hidden in the basement. I don't even know what could be there. Well, okay, we'll see tomorrow, Stuart smiled. On the next morning, Stuart took out a flashlight, handed it to Penelope, and ordered her to follow him. In the kitchen, he lifted the heavy lid of the pantry, carefully descended, and as soon as he reached the ground, he shouted to Penelope to also come down. When they turned on the flashlight, the darkness dissipated, and in the corner, they saw traces of brickwork. After dismantling the bricks, they pulled out a small iron chest. The key turned with a creak in the hole, a click sounded, and Penelope gingerly lifted the lid off the chest. Inside was a small bag on a string. Stuart took it, untied it, and poured the contents into his palm. Penelope brought the flashlight closer, and froze in amazement. On Stuart's palm, the sharp edges of real precious stones glistened and sparkled with different colors. Penelope and Stuart stood, admiring the incredible and mesmerizing sight. Unable to look away, and everything that was happening seemed like a fairy tale dream to them. Having come to his senses, Stuart chose the biggest ruby from the pile of stones and gave it to Penelope. The girl accepted the gift and began to admire it. You know, I remembered. My grandfather once told me about his youth. He worked in the mines, but I never thought that he hid his findings and kept them for so many years. Stuart took a final look at the exquisite treasure, neatly folded the stones back into the bag, and smiled contentedly. He felt confident again, and hoped that everything would be fine for them now, as he could use the inheritance to get the store out of debt, improve the business, and buy himself the most modern prosthesis. Will you marry me? He suddenly asked Penelope. We will sell the stones, leave here and start a new happy life. Do you agree? Of course, my love, if you only knew how long I've been waiting for this, she whispered, and hugging Stuart around the neck, buried her face in his chest. Stuart hugged the girl tightly and realized that all the pain and heaviness of the past few months after the accident was finally leaving. Love helped him forget about despair, betrayal and disappointment, filling his soul with the long-forgotten feeling of incredible, all-consuming. She would put on her underwear and run home to hide her secret from her husband. But what was the secret? Today, we will tell you life stories and accounts of how wives are forced to use different ways to take pity on their husbands. Are you ready to find out the truth? I want to tell you a very ambiguous story, although some might not call it ambiguous. It was about a kiss, and you can say 100 years ago, which resulted in a worse than nuclear war. To help you understand the whole picture, I am 40 years old, my wife Elizabeth 36, and of course, has a child 10 years old. Everything is fine with money and so on. The beginning of the whole story, if of course, you can believe my dear wife, was one evening on February 23rd. Our colleagues in the organization and I, of course, congratulated each other. A little by the evening, we celebrated the whole thing in the workplace. The girls at work set the table for us. I call my wife. Liz, we are here. Well, this is the very little. If you have a chance, after work, come straight here for me. We'll celebrate here a little bit. Well, you can pick me up and drive, so I don't have to leave my car here. I'm good. If I'd known how this simple request of mine would end, I wouldn't have drank at all, and I would have picked up whoever and wherever I wanted at once. Long or short, the dinners at work that night were also a humbling event. They were there too, congratulating the staff. In general, we had more bottles of cognac that evening than expected, and some of our young people here began to play the bottle. Well, like young people play, and we are older just for fun. We are sitting. Anyway, I think it's time to write to my wife. Where are you? She's texting me. I'm getting in a cab. I'll be right there. Okay. I take some more cognac, stand closer to the exit. There's a window, at least to get some air, and the sleeves on my shirt, of course, are already rolled up. Mine and everyone else's is fine. All of a sudden, one of our youngest madams comes up, and she calls me by my name and patronymic. Anyway, there's that bottle there pointed at me, and she kind of has to kiss me here, and in general, not really expecting an answer from me, takes my chin right with two hands and kisses me, without taking away from me and turning her head to the staff. Well, sort of, so that they can see that she has completed this task. Well, as you have already realized, of course, at this point, my wife walks in as well. Oil painting. We're kind of standing there with this madam, just the two of us. It all looks like we stepped away from the collective for some business. We both smell of alcohol. Well, the last moments of the kiss, I think the wife saw perfectly well too. I pretended as if nothing had happened. There really wasn't anything going on. I had nothing to do with it, but it wasn't. While Lisa and I, my wife and I were in the car, we were talking as if nothing had happened. In fact, I figured we'd probably talk tomorrow, if we talked at all, and for nothing. The next day, my wife was already blacker than a cloud. I somehow explained to her what it was, and after a couple of days, she, kind of believed me. I exhaled, but it turned out far from that. A month goes by to 6 months, and every time, on occasion, and without it, my wife immediately reminds me of this case, and because of these reminders, fight more. I told her if she did not forgive me, she could have told me so, instead of forgiving at first, and then reminding me every day. As soon as I said that, and got really angry, she immediately took a step back, saying that she was kidding, and that she would relax. But if the quarrel again, she immediately reminds me of it all again. In short, found a string, how to act on the nerves. Here, so to speak, as it is impossible, I turned out to her something like a promotion. She had been working in a jewelry store, and after an employee in their larger office went on maternity leave, Elizabeth was offered the job. The neighborhood was a little farther from home, but the pay was higher, and so on. I generally agreed without asking me, and the schedule was from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., and the schedule was 3 days through 3. I, by the way, paid attention at once. It was the first time I had ever heard of such a schedule, but later found out what kind of schedule, what hobbies, except work, there were dinners. Anyway, it's been a year and a half, and then she walks into our lounge in the evening, and says, I'm sick of it all. I honestly, at first I thought the conversation was about work. You don't give me any time or attention at all. Well, don't make promises that you will now. You're an adult, you can't be changed. I've made up my mind, I've been thinking for a long time. In short, the point is that I have to go out now. Of course, I'm shocked. The next day, I try to talk again, and she is not, all in the same spirit. Torture my presence, to cut a long story short, I was not going to torture anyone. I decided to go to a friend's house for a couple of weeks at their empty house. It happens that people get bored with each other, and as a result, we make up. But it turned out to be much more interesting. We are sitting with a friend at this dacha, and with his encouragement, we come to the conclusion that there is something for a reason. It has been a week and a half. The wife, in terms of communication, doesn't even scratch the surface. Yes, and crowned, we need a break from each other. In such stories usually means something else. Anyway, I think, Well, did someone show up? My friend definitely thinks so. And in my brain, at once her surfaces schedule 3 days and 3. Long or short, it looks like she has someone. And that someone is connected to her at this exact time. 3 days and 3, from 9 in the morning until 8 at night. What to do? I called the next day at my wife's to talk. But no, she stayed in the position she was in. We'll take a break from each other, but we'll decide sometime later too. Yeah, sure. But anyway, there's nothing to do. I take my friend's car and drive right up to the driveway at 8 in the morning, so I can actually see where she's going and when. She gets out in the morning, jumps in a cab, and goes to this job of hers. I walk her there, driving to mine. Then in the evening, I decide to go to her place again and see who will give her a ride home from work tonight. Well, if she got a ride. But then the situation repeats itself again. I can't follow my wife around indefinitely. I am also at work. In fact, there is no evidence. I have no guarantees that this is not nothing, and I do not do nonsense. In short, again, we are sitting at the cottage with a friend. And it has been almost a month. I come to our house and see my son. But Elizabeth doesn't say yes or no. I wouldn't want to talk about it now. Let's get through these days. And then we'll see what and where it takes us. Okay, imagine what I have to do. I mean, there's no reason to get divorced. But it's not a life together under these conditions either. But fortunately, this epic is still over. This same friend calls me and asks the address of the salon where his wife works. Listen, he said, it's all so cool and big. Where is it located? I need to buy a gift certificate. And while I'm there, maybe out of your tears, I'll talk to you. I gave him that address, the phone number. He called me back 2 hours later and told me his wife wasn't there. 2 counselors are there and no one from the bosses. But it's probably not her shift. I tell him, but my heart is restless. I take the car and go to the house. I come home and there is no one at home. Where is she then? I call her, she doesn't answer. I call her parents and she's not there either. The time had already come for the evening. I get in the car, go to her work, drove up, stood far away, waited. 8 p.m. comes up. I see Lisa coming out of the salon. And there's a guy next to her looking maybe 20 or 25. They go to his bad weather expensive and honest stamp. And in fact, they get in. I will not describe my emotions. They were contradictory. Well, on the one hand, at least I knew that my suspicions were not groundless. Well, on the other hand, I wanted to go out and ask questions directly. But luckily, I held back at the time. As it turned out, rightly so. I'm sitting here wondering where, in fact, they're going. They drove home. He dropped her off in front of our driveway and left. I immediately picked her up, parked my car right there and went straight up to our house. Opened the door with my key. She was already on her phone with someone. I took the cell phone out of her hand. And while it was unlocked, I went to her message. For this month, while she's been out here, let's say walking around. Apparently, my return wasn't really expected. So all the messages with this young, handsome guy, she did not delete at all. Anyway, I read everything in there. It turns out that in this main office, there is a management office. And this boy is actually, well, he's the son of one of the executives of this network. That's actually why you don't see him going up to her house. They had an office right at work for that. Now I see. That's actually why my friend today, when he came to the jewelry store, he didn't find Lisa at her workplace. The work must have been done in the office. Anyway, I didn't see any tears or sobs that night. She didn't really deny it. On the contrary, she finally told me all the things they'd been thinking about me for the past 2 years. Of course, they remembered that kissed on February 23rd, adding that that was just the tip of the iceberg. And supposedly, there's a bunch more betrayals behind me that she's sure she won't remember and figure out. That's it. Like I said, the whole situation is ambiguous. Somebody could say, it's your own fault. It was you on February 23rd kissed that lady. But I don't think that's a big deal. And it's a damn good excuse. And it's not a good excuse on February 23rd. He always thought his wife was just going to beauty salon treatments to keep her skin in shape. But when he happened to notice intimate treatments being performed right outside their apartment windows. But what he found out made him lose his head and raise a ruckus that all the neighbors in their building remembered. I want to tell you a truly detective story, witnesses and even participants, which happened to be myself. Saturday evening, I received a phone call from a friend of mine. Where are you? What are you? How are you? Let's see you. We can even talk in my house. Or better yet, let's meet at the store first. I think that without the store, we will not make it here. All right. I got ready, got in a cab and went to my friend's place. Anyway, after a short conversation, it turned out that he and his wife had had another fight. For the 10th or 20th time this month, I asked him approximately yes. And where is she now? I don't know. Turns out they've been having it for a month now. And each time, in order not to make this situation worse, Andrew goes to his office so that he and his wife alone would blow off steam, cool off. And he goes back to their house the next day or every other day. And little by little, everything kind of calms down. But after a while, it's all over again. He leaves the house again. Of course, they disconnect their phones from each other at these moments. And this has been going on for about 5 weeks now. And then it coincided with the weekend. So what do I tell him? And that I did not really want to ruin the weekend today, says Andre. But no matter how hard I tried, we still had a fight. I kind of left again. But then I decided to talk right away and make things work out. Call her. Her phone is off. Came home a couple of hours later. She's not home. Get it? Yeah. So we sat down with him for a while, finished what we brought from the store. It's outside. But for a second, it's almost 4 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting there feeling that we were starting to sober up a little bit. We had a last drink of tea. And I said I was going home. Otherwise, yours will come. And we are sitting in this kind of well condition. Moreover, that you have already quarreled, not very much it will look from the outside. Although to return to her husband only in the morning is also not very from the outside. Okay, that's it. Let's go. We said goodbye. I threw on my jacket and went downstairs. Standing near their doorway. It's a little cold. It's early spring. I got out on purpose and didn't call a cab. I thought I would take a walk, get some air, have a smoke, but then I would go. I looked and there was no lighter in my pocket. I searched all my pockets, and there was definitely no lighter. It seems to be on Andre's balcony. And those back to his 3rd floor. The last thing I wanted now. Moreover, I look out the window. The light at Andrew is not lit. Probably asleep. Okay. And I see in their yard in front of Andrew's new house. There's a car with the lights on and parked in the so-called 2nd row. But it means kind of came recently. And for sure there is someone inside. I come up in the back. I see the front window is ajar. I said, buddy, they're gonna be lighters. He reached for the ceiling light in the car and turned on the interior light. I'm standing outside in the dark and can't see me. I can see the cabin with the lights on pretty well. No one in the passenger seat. It's pushed all the way forward. I hear a lady's voice coming from the back seat. She said to my date. Okay, I gotta go. I'll call you. And she kissed the driver on the cheek. I leaned over to look and the lady had already opened kind of the back door, but also kind of on her way out. I looked closer. It's Marinka. I think it's Andrea. I immediately turned my back to them. I hear her get out of the car, slam the back door. Well, and goes to his entrance home. That's right. The driver couldn't find a lighter, started the car and told me that yes, now the cigarette lighter. I was sobered up by such surprises from Marinka. And I thought that I should make friends with this friend. I wonder if it's a brother or some colleague at work. And now I'll take Andrew. Although why would she then was a colleague to kiss something? Okay. I hear it. And his car chain noise. Well, when he started the car, I could hear it under the hood. And I said to him, that's the chain. They have a problem area. Yes, we allegedly when we worked in the service in the non-existent, when we came often on these, the owners often thought that the matter was moving towards a full-blown engine overhaul, but it turned out not. He tells me yes. And I was getting kind of wary too. So back and forth, we talked a little bit. I said, that's it. I should go home. It's time. Which way are you going now? He told me the direction. I told him I was going that way too. Let's go. Let's go. Do you mind if I sit in the back? They're going to stop the smell of alcohol and all that. Okay. I get in the back. I see the front passenger seat is definitely in an unnatural position for him. It's too far forward. Anyway, we're driving along. We're talking. I'm telling him about his date. Pretty girl, got a girlfriend. He says she's got a lot of things. Are we laughing? Okay. I run my left hand over the back seat. And I feel like there's nothing there. I look and we're pretty far gone. I think it's time for me to get out too. Okay. There's a junction coming up. I tell him. And after the stop, I came all turned on my phone flashlight. I look, and on the floor directly behind the driver's seat is a hairbrush. Obviously not a man's, but I think let it be evidence. If everything is confirmed, and if it doesn't, I'll call and I'll give it back. We exchanged phone numbers with the driver. He said if there was a problem with the engine, he could call. I went out and called my friend, to whom the wife returned in the morning. Andrew did not pick up the phone. I took a cab back to the house. The next day, Andrew called back himself, but there was no sensation. I told him about how last night I had fun investigating the alleged cheating and that I even have proof of a sort, but it turned out that Marinka herself took and told him I got home at about 5 o'clock in the morning. Andrew could they're in an unsuitable state for such a conversation. In short, as a result, they and his friends, all what they think and everything as it is said, that's pretty much it. The only really unpleasant thing about this story is that there is no consistency. First, they should have broken up, and then they should have thrown their calms, walking around at least until morning. If you like this story, don't forget to rate it and give it a like. Welcome back to the channel. Hope everyone is having a wonderful day or evening. In today's story, OP found out his wife cheated on him with his gym trainer after he showed up to her work and saw them. He then followed AP home and told his wife about it. Now, OP's wife and AP are a complete wreck after what OP and AP's wife did to get revenge. Now, let's get into today's story to find out what happened. I was 22 years old when I decided to join a gym and build some muscle. It was there that I met my future ex-wife and trainer, who was 25 years old. She was amazingly fit. Whenever I worked out, she became my motivation. She'd joke with me, laugh, and ask me questions about my job and hobbies. I gained muscle under her watch and eventually asked her on a date. Throughout our dating relationship, she never shared anything about herself that I didn't instantly fall in love with. When my dad met her, he insisted that I pop the question. Looking back now, I know it was too soon. I think Dad and I were just excited at the thought of expanding our small family. We had a big wedding. My dad spared no expense. A few years later, we still didn't have a baby, but things seemed to be going fine. She was still a trainer at the gym and I'd moved up in my dad's company. We spent lots of time together because we got home from work at the same time each day. We were open about our cell phones, but I never asked to check hers. I never felt like I needed to until 5 years later. My dad passed away, so I was basically running his business. I started getting home a little later, around 5 p.m., and I'd find her at home being a wonderful housewife and making dinner or something. Well, after a few months of this, she arrived home after me one night. This was odd because she never worked late or did anything without sending me a text. When I asked her where she'd been, she was surprised I didn't get her text. She showed me how she typed out a text to me, but didn't push send. The text said that she was going to give a coworker a ride home because his car wouldn't start. This was just a red flag to me and I knew something was up. She started taking her phone into the bathroom with her, and this was the second red flag. We never made a rule for this, but she'd never done it because she wanted to be in and out quickly. I waited a minute before I walked in on her, trying to see what was on her phone. She was definitely texting someone before she jumped out of her skin and looked like she was caught red-handed. After a verbal fight ensued, I was finally able to check her phone. It was a string of texts to a number that wasn't saved. It appeared that some of the texts were missing because the conversation didn't make sense. Only innocent enough sounding texts were left behind without context. The whole time I checked her phone, she was bright red. I asked for more information, but she swore it was the same friend who needed a ride home, and that nothing was going on. I pretended to let it go, but secretly decided to follow her to work the next day. I saw a male coworker greet her with a smile and hug. I returned later as they were getting off work, and saw him give her another hug. My blood was boiling. Who was this guy, and why was it so normal for him to touch my wife? They chatted about God knows what, until I texted her to say I'd be home late. She looked at the text with him standing beside her, and then leaned close to tell him something. They both walked to his car, got in, and left. I followed them to his house and sat in my car for a few minutes. Before I get out of the car, a woman knocks on my window. She demands to know who I am and why I'm outside of her house. Although I was very confused, I told her what was going on. As she listened, a look of concern spread across her face. She said that she'd been suspecting her husband of cheating with a coworker, and thought he was bringing her here while she worked late. Tonight, she came home early without informing him, and that's when she saw my car. She invited me to join her while she knocked on the door. We held our breath until her husband answered the door. He turned white, and I could see beads of sweat appear on his forehead. He starts playing dumb and asking what's going on right before his wife explodes on him. Her screams urge my wife to rush to the door, adjusting her clothes as she makes eye contact with me. She immediately starts fighting back tears as she explains that she just wanted to come over and hang out with him, something that makes no sense and has no credibility at all. While the wife screams at her husband, I notice my wife's wedding ring is missing from her finger. I demand that she gets in my car, and she does. On the way to pick up her car, she would not admit that they had sex. I was trembling as I drove. My wife never showed me any signs of wanting something different from what we had. I asked her why she slept with him, but she denied it again. She said they were only supposed to hang out, and that she didn't know he was married either. When I asked her why her wedding ring was off, she told me it was because it pinched whenever she lifted weights. I didn't believe her, but I didn't make her leave the house either. A part of me wanted this to be a bad dream. She didn't go back to work, and for about 2 months, she lived each day in suspense and humility while she did her best to please me. I basically ignored her and all the questions my brain wanted answers to. Like, was she still secretly talking to this man? Why won't she admit she had sex when I know she did? Does she even want to be married? How could I ever trust her again? That's when I got an email from that man's wife. My email isn't hard to find if you know my name. She told me that her husband finally told her what happened, that my wife had been to their house at least 2 times before that, and that each time, she had sex with her husband. She added that she was sorry to be the bearer of bad news, and that she planned on informing their boss of the affair. It was the worst news of my life. Instead of talking to me about whatever was going through her head and trying to keep our marriage sacred, she went behind my back and slept with him. The level of betrayal was unspeakable. I confronted her, calling her a liar and showing her the email I received. She started crying and begging me to forgive her. She said that they had chemistry at work, and the thought of sleeping with him just crossed her mind. She said it was a mistake to go through with it, and that she's hated herself ever since it happened. I told her I didn't believe a damn word she said, because apparently, she had gone back to his house more than once to sleep with him. It takes an awful lot of deceit and intent to keep going back like that. She cheated on me more than once with some guy she knew for about a month. I told her how upset I was that she never tried to talk to me about any of it while pretending she had no secrets from me. Because of her infidelity and lies, I filed for divorce. My dad raised me to be emotionally strong and to make decisions that need to be made. I'm almost glad he died before she did this, so that according to him, we lived happily ever after. But no! Instead of that, her affair and bad reputation became the hot gossip of our small town. The dude was kicked out by his wife around the same time I kicked out my ex. They were both fired, divorced at a young age, and labeled as cheaters. I heard he won't date her because he doesn't trust her. Go figure. A few weeks later, I took the betrayed wife out for dinner, and we had a good time. OP, I am very sorry your wife was unfaithful to you. People make mistakes, but when it comes to this level of betrayal, it's hard to recover from it. As long as you try to stay with her, you probably second-guess everything she said, and never truly feel comfortable in the relationship. Marriage requires hard work and honesty, both of which seem far-fetched to that woman. She went back more than once to commit the same sin against you, and was only remorseful after she was caught. This type of woman is not mature enough or ready for marriage, and sometimes it's a lesson learned too late. I am happy for you that you made the quick and accurate decision to get divorced. It can be difficult for people to make this decision, although it is often the better option when it comes to infidelity. Keep yourself number one in your life until you find someone who becomes just as important. Now let's get into today's second story. My ex and I have attended the same church since we were kids. Well, not anymore, and you'll understand at the end. We started dating each other when she was 20 and I was 21. Our parents were both strict in our religion, and expected us to abstain from sex until marriage. We agreed at first, but it became quite a challenge, and we did it a few times. Around the time I proposed, we began attending separate Bible study groups for men and women. Each group would discuss things like how important it was to keep yourself pure until marriage under God, what was expected of a Christian wife or husband, and stuff like that. These groups met at the same time once a week, and I would drive my fans home afterward. One night, I waited an extra 10 minutes for her to come out of the church. It wasn't too odd to me, and I didn't ask anything. She seemed happy and fine. The next week, I waited 15 minutes. This time, I asked what held her up. She said she likes talking to one of the leaders after the lesson to get a better understanding of it. I didn't want to push any further, so I let it go. The next week, as I'm waiting for her to come out of the church, one of the women from her group knocked on my window. She says she wants to let me know that my fiancé has been staying later to talk to a man that helps out with sound tech during their meetings. This really took me by surprise. She was staying later to talk to another man. I'd been under the impression only women were allowed in the group, including staff. When my fiancé finally got back to the car, I asked her about it. She got defensive and asked why it's a big deal for her to talk to a church leader about Bible lessons. I clarified that this man doesn't participate in the women's group. He's only there as a technical assistant. Then I asked why she was talking to him about the lessons of such a personal journey. She just shrugged and said she didn't think anyone from the church was off limits for Bible discussions. I asked her to stop talking to him altogether, and she agreed to stop so that I wouldn't worry. The next week, I was waiting for her to get back to the car when I got a text from her that said she'd already gotten a ride home from a girl in the group. This really upset me. The church doors only open from the inside this late at night. I tried calling her several times, but she didn't answer. As a woman was walking back to her car, I asked her if she happened to see my finance inside. She said no, the room was empty. I drove to her house and knocked on the door. No one answered. I assumed it was because they were sleeping and I didn't have a key. I decided to give up for the night and had faith that the truth would soon be revealed. On Sunday morning after the service, a church leader waited until my fiancé went into the bathroom to pull me aside and tell me some concerning news. We went into a little security room with some other church staff and lots of screens. They directed my attention to one screen and apologized for having to show me this. In the video, my fiancé can be seen with the tech man going into a room alone. They emerge later looking pleased. I asked if they have video footage of the room they went into, and they say yes, but that I wouldn't want to see that. The man in question was most definitely not aware there was a camera in that room as well. I'm sure my face was bright red at this point. I hated her for embarrassing me like this. I still do a little bit. Someone left the security room to retrieve my fiancé and the man in question. Funny coincidence that they were chatting with each other when he found them. As soon as they enter the room, they know this is bad. The guy tries to leave immediately, but he's stopped by the pastor of the church. He says that we need to discuss this and the repercussions that will follow. After the clip of them going in the room played, my fiancé's tears started flowing and she told me she was sorry. I told her that we were over and got her engagement ring back. She loudly sobbed while the pastor told the guy he's fired and may have charges pressed against him. He then left the room and I followed him, brushing past my ex. I followed him outside and heavily considered fighting him, but I didn't feel like I needed to. My fiancé caught up to me and started begging for forgiveness. I told her that she has ultimately shamed herself, her faith, and me. There's no way she can recover my trust, and it would be much easier for me to just move on and start over new. For the next few weeks at church, everyone was talking about her, him, and their shame. They didn't attend the church anymore. Everyone stole glances at me as I walked by, and only a few people attempted to console me about it. It didn't take long for me to decide I needed a new church. My ex lost all credibility with the people she held closest to her. I can only hope to find a good wife that holds the same values I do. Wow. That is a very difficult thing to go through. It sounds like your ex and that guy got the shame and disgrace that they deserved. It just pains me that you were outcast as well. You had your heart in a good place, attempting to do things properly when she decided to take advantage of you. The good news is that, like you expected, the truth did come out and you have an opportunity to marry a woman that deserves your loyalty and dedication. Even if it feels like the world around you is falling apart, there is hope. Hope is stubborn and doesn't give up on us. As long as we are true to ourselves and practice self-love, we are on the right path. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened in both stories. I believed in us. We were high school sweethearts and our love story was the kind people dream of. 9 years of what I believed to be marital bliss shattered in an instant. It was a video message sent from an anonymous number that ripped my world apart. The video showed my wife at a bachelorette party, a night she told me was just about harmless fun with her friends. It turned out to be far from that. In the grainy footage, I saw her with a man, their actions clear and heart-wrenching. A tidal wave of betrayal washed over me. My heartbeat sounded loud in my ears, the video ended, but the image kept playing over and over in my mind. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted was leading a life I knew nothing about. I felt a strange combination of anger, heartbreak, and annoying sense of confusion. How did we get here? Was our love not real? I felt as though I was teetering on the edge of a precipice, the ground crumbling beneath me. I knew then I couldn't let this slide. The love I had for her, the memories we made, they demanded truth. I needed to know the extent of her infidelity. So, with a heavy heart and a need for answers, I decided to hire a private investigator. It was a step I never thought I'd have to take, but here I was faced with the unthinkable. This was just the beginning of the unraveling. The day after the video arrived, I woke up with a purpose. The dull ache in my chest hadn't subsided, but there was a newfound determination in me. The decision to hire a private investigator was not taken lightly. It felt like admitting that my marriage was beyond saving, yet I needed answers, a full understanding of the depth of my wife's betrayal. I spent the morning researching, sifting through local private investigation firms. I sought an experienced professional, someone who could discreetly uncover the truth. I finally settled on a firm with a stellar reputation for handling delicate domestic cases. I made the call and within minutes, I was pouring out my story to a stranger. The voice on the other end was calm, reassuring, and professional, promising to handle the case with the utmost discretion. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread, relief because I had taken a step towards the truth, dread because of what that truth might reveal. I looked around our home, the home I thought was filled with love and trust. It felt different now, tainted by the bitter sting of betrayal. The private investigator would start work the next day. I braced myself for what was to come. And as I did, I realized that this was more than just about uncovering my wife's secrets. It was about me taking control, reclaiming my life from the devastation that had been thrust upon me. The path to truth was set and there was no turning back. In the days that followed, the private investigator began his work in earnest. The first set of reports came in just a week after the investigation began. As I read through them, my heart sank. My wife had not just cheated at the bachelorette party. She had been leading a double life for the past 2 years. Meeting multiple men at hidden corners of our city, leaving a trail of deceit that now lay bare before me. Photographs, text messages, and even audio recordings, the evidence was overwhelming. I felt a cold anger welling up inside me, as the woman I thought I knew became a stranger in front of my eyes. Her laughter echoed in our home, a haunting reminder of the duplicity that had been living with me. Each revelation brought with it a fresh wave of pain, but it also brought clarity. The late-night phone calls she said were from work. The weekend trips with her girlfriends, the times when she seemed distant, it all started to make sense. As I sifted through the evidence, I felt a strange sense of vindication. My suspicions were confirmed, and while the truth was agonizing, it was better than the torment of uncertainty. The investigation had provided me with a solid ground to stand on, a foundation upon which I could start rebuilding my life. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of my journey towards reclaiming my life. With the bitter truth laid bare, I knew I needed to protect myself, and that meant securing my finances. The thought of my wife, the woman who had betrayed me, having access to my hard-earned money was repulsive. I spent the next day meeting with my bank, opening 2 new accounts in my name alone. It was an arduous process filled with endless paperwork, but every signature felt like a step towards my independence. Next, I removed my wife from my life insurance policy. It felt surreal, erasing her name from a document that had once signified our mutual trust and commitment. I knew this was just the beginning of the long, bureaucratic journey of disentangling our lives, but it was a necessary step. Finally, I closed our joint credit card accounts. These cards, once symbols of our shared life and dreams, had become reminders of our shattered trust. I cut them up, each snip of the scissors echoing the finality of my decision. Throughout the day, I was fueled by a sense of urgency, a drive to take control of my life again. I was determined not to be a victim, but to be the architect of my own future. And while the emotional wounds were still raw, these practical steps gave me a sense of empowerment. I was not just reacting to my wife's betrayal, but proactively protecting myself. It was a small victory in a sea of turmoil, but it was my victory. And for now, that was enough. With my financial house in order, the next step was clear. I needed to seek legal counsel. It was time to make this separation official, to start the process of legally detaching myself from the woman who had broken our vows. I contacted a local attorney, renowned for his expertise in handling complex divorce cases. I laid out the evidence before him, the pile of photographs, text messages, and audio clips, each one a dagger in my heart. He listened attentively, his face a mask of professional empathy. When I was done, he assured me that the evidence was substantial and that it would significantly influence the proceedings in my favor. We discussed the various aspects of the divorce, the division of assets, the fate of our house, and even the possibility of alimony. As I listened to him talk about the legal implications of my wife's infidelity, I felt a strange sense of detachment. It was as though we were discussing a business transaction, not the end of a relationship that had once meant the world to me. As I left his office, I felt an odd sense of relief. I had taken another major step in reclaiming control over my life. I was no longer just a man who had been cheated on. I was the man who was taking charge, making decisions, and protecting my interests. It was a small consolation, but at that moment, it was enough to keep me moving forward. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, the need to confront my wife grew stronger. With the knowledge of her betrayal and my lawyer's counsel, I decided it was time. I felt a strange calm wash over me as I prepared to face the woman who had once been the center of my world. One evening, as she returned home, I asked her to sit down. There was a brief flicker of confusion in her eyes, quickly replaced by a mask of indifference. I wondered how many times she had worn that mask while lying to me. I confronted her about her infidelity, laying bare the evidence I had gathered. I watched as her face turned from surprise to shock and then finally to guilt. But there was something else too, a hint of defiance that made my blood boil. I demanded that she leave our home. I wanted to erase her presence, to cleanse our shared space of the deceit that had tainted it. Her refusal to leave, however, was a punch to my gut. Her insistence on staying, even after everything she had done, was a slap in the face. Our home, once a sanctuary filled with love and laughter, had become a battlefield. The tension was palpable as we circled around each other. The silence between us heavy with unspoken words and pent-up emotions. Yet, amidst the chaos and pain, I found a shred of comfort in the confrontation. I had stood up for myself, faced the woman who had betrayed me and demanded the respect I deserved. It was a small victory, but it was mine. And in that moment, it gave me the strength to keep fighting. My wife's refusal to leave the house was a harsh blow. It felt as if she was mocking me, insisting on her presence in a home that no longer felt like ours. Despite the confrontation and the evidence of her infidelity, she seemed determined to hold her ground. In my frustration, I sought advice from my lawyer. The news was less than favorable. Despite the house being mine, I couldn't legally force her to leave the marital home until after the divorce was finalized. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The walls of our house, once filled with love, now felt like a prison. Living under the same roof with her was unbearable. Each shared glance was a reminder of her betrayal. Each encounter a test of my patience. I felt a growing resentment towards her, an emotion that was new and unwelcome. However, I couldn't let her refusal to leave break me. I was already in the process of reclaiming my life, and I wasn't about to let her defiance stop me. I retreated into myself, choosing to focus on my well-being and the legal proceedings at hand. The house was no longer a home, but a battleground where we coexisted in uncomfortable silence. Yet, in the midst of this tense standoff, I held my ground. I knew that this was just a temporary obstacle, a storm that I had to weather before I could finally move on. And so, I braced myself for the challenging days ahead, determined to stand my ground. With each passing day, the tension within the house grew. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional forced conversations necessary for cohabitation. The standoff had turned into a waiting game, each of us anticipating the final verdict that would set us free from this toxic environment. In the midst of this strained silence, I continued to focus on the divorce proceedings. The paperwork seemed endless, each document a cold reminder of our crumbling marriage. Yet, there was a grim satisfaction in each completed form, each signed affidavit, small steps toward my newfound freedom. In the midst of this turmoil, I found pleasure in simple routines, like cooking my meals, going for a run, or even reading a book in the quiet corner of our house provided much-needed distractions from the harsh reality. Despite the strained atmosphere, I found myself growing stronger. I was no longer the same man who had discovered his wife's betrayal. I was evolving, becoming more resilient, more determined. With every passing day, I was less the victim and more the survivor. My wife's presence was a constant reminder of her infidelity, yet it also served as a catalyst, pushing me to fast-track the divorce proceedings. I was eager to reclaim my space, to banish the ghost of her betrayal from my life. But for now, I had to be patient, to play the waiting game until the final verdict was delivered. The day finally arrived when the divorce proceedings officially began. The courtroom was sterile and intimidating. As I sat across from my wife, a surge of emotions washed over me. I was about to legally sever ties with the woman I had once vowed to spend my life with. The proceedings were complex and emotionally taxing. My lawyer presented the evidence of her infidelity, each piece, a stark reminder of her betrayal. The court listened. The judge's face impassive, as he leafed through the documents, detailing my wife's double life. My wife's lawyer attempted to defend her, spinning tales and twisting truths. It was a difficult thing to witness, yet I remained stoic, focusing on the end goal. I reminded myself that this was a necessary step towards my freedom. Despite the bitter taste of proceedings left in my mouth, I felt a sense of progress. With each passing minute, I was closer to being free from the chains of this failed marriage. The courtroom, while intimidating, was the arena where I was finally able to voice my grievances, to demand justice for the wrong done to me. As I left the courtroom that day, I felt exhausted, yet strangely exhilarated. The journey was far from over, but I had survived the first battle. I was one step closer to reclaiming my life. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope for a brighter future. As the divorce proceedings continued, the emotional toll started to weigh heavily on me. Even though I was determined to move forward, I found myself grappling with feelings of loss, betrayal, and loneliness. I would sometimes find myself wandering through the house, the echoes of the past resonating off the walls. The memories of happier times would sneak up on me, bringing with them a fresh wave of pain. The woman I had once loved, the woman I had shared my dreams with, was now a stranger. There were nights when I lay awake, plagued by a sea of unanswered questions. Why did she cheat? Where did we go wrong? Could I have done something different? These thoughts would spin around in my head, leaving me feeling lost and confused. Despite the pain, I knew I had to confront these emotions. I allowed myself to grieve, to feel the loss. It was a part of the healing process, a necessary step towards moving on. In the midst of this emotional turmoil, I found peace in unexpected places. The chance meeting with an old friend led to regular coffee catch-ups. A neglected hobby was rediscovered, providing a welcome distraction. Slowly, I started building a support system, drawing strength from these small yet significant connections. The emotional struggle was real and it was hard, but I was learning to navigate it, finding my way through the storm one day at a time. And with each passing day, I felt a little stronger, a little more resilient. I was not just surviving. I was learning to thrive. Finally, the day of the final verdict arrived. As I sat in the courtroom, heart pounding, I felt an odd mix of fear and relief. Today, the legal ties that bound me to my wife would be severed. The judge delivered the verdict with a stern, impartial expression. The evidence of my wife's infidelity coupled with my lawful conduct throughout the process influenced the decision. The house was granted to me a significant victory in the long, arduous battle. My wife's face remained unreadable as the verdict was pronounced, her emotions hidden behind a mask of indifference. I felt a pang of resentment towards her, yet there was also a sense of closure. As I left the courtroom, the finality of the situation hit me. I was now officially divorced. The chapter of my life that had been tainted by betrayal and pain was finally closed. With the final verdict, the reality of my new status settled in. I was a divorced man at 30. The house, once filled with shared dreams and laughter, was now solely mine. It felt larger, emptier, yet it was a canvas ready for a fresh start. In the days that followed, I began the process of removing her presence from my space. I packed up her belongings, each item, a bitter reminder of our shared past. I rearranged the furniture, painted the walls, a new color, and even adopted a dog, a long-held dream of mine that she'd always vetoed. Yet, the quiet was sometimes too loud. The absence of her presence was a constant reminder of the void that the end of our marriage had left in my life. I found myself grappling with the loneliness that the silence brought, but I also found moments of peace in it. Despite the pain, I started to see the glimmers of a new beginning in the aftermath. It was the start of a journey where I was in control, a journey towards healing and self-discovery. And while the road seemed long and arduous, I was ready to embark on it, one step at a time. As weeks turned into months, I slowly adjusted to my new normal. The house, once a stark reminder of my failed marriage, started to feel like home again. The silence, which had initially been overwhelming, was now comforting. My daily routines evolved without her presence. I started cooking for myself, trying out recipes that I had always wanted to. I spent evenings reading in the quiet corner of the house or playing with my new dog. I started to rebuild my social life, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. I took up hobbies that I had long neglected, finding joy in activities that I had forgotten about. I also started therapy, a decision that proved instrumental in my healing process. It provided a safe space to process my emotions, to understand my feelings of betrayal and grief, and to learn how to trust again. Adjusting to the new normal was not easy. There were moments of loneliness, moments when the weight of the past threatened to pull me down. But with each passing day, the pain dulled a bit, replaced by a newfound sense of hope. I was learning to live again, to find joy in the small things and to look forward to the future. The healing process was slow and often painful, but I was committed to it. I started to understand that it wasn't the linear journey. There were days when I felt strong and optimistic, and there were days when the pain seemed unbearable, but I held on, knowing that each day was a step towards healing. Therapy was a significant part of my healing journey. It helped me unpack the layers of betrayal, resentment, and grief. It helped me understand that it was okay to feel the way I did, that healing took time. I started to learn how to forgive, not for her, but for me. I started to indulge in self-care, taking time each day to do something that made me happy, whether it was reading a book, going for a run, or simply sitting in my backyard with my dog. These moments of solitude were therapeutic. I also started journaling, a practice that proved to be incredibly cathartic. Writing about my feelings, my fears, and my hopes helped me process my emotions. It provided an outlet for the whirlwind of emotions that often threatened to consume me. Through this healing process, I realized that I was more than just a man who had been cheated on. I was a survivor, a fighter. I was someone who had faced betrayal and heartbreak, yet was still standing. And with each passing day, I was becoming stronger. The year had passed since the day I discovered my wife's betrayal. It felt like a lifetime ago. I was not the same man I was back then. I had grown, evolved, and healed. I had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. I was finally able to look back at the past without the sharp sting of betrayal. I accepted that my marriage was a part of my life that had ended, a chapter that had closed. It was a part of my journey, but it did not define me. As I sat in my house, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The walls that once echoed with deceit were now filled with hope and resilience. The rooms that once felt cold and empty were now filled with warmth and love for myself. I felt ready to move on, to open myself up to new experiences, new people. The thought of dating again was both exciting and terrifying, but I knew I was ready to take the leap. I was ready to explore this new chapter of my life. My journey had been a roller coaster of emotions filled with heartbreak and healing. But as I looked back, I realized that it was also a journey of self-discovery and growth. I had faced the worst and had come out stronger. I was ready for whatever life had in store for me. And so, with a sense of optimism and hope, I stepped into the new chapter of my life. Oh, I forgot to add, my ex-wife was thrown in jail for driving under the influence a few months after the divorce. She had lost her job, moved back in with her mom. Last I heard, she was still living at home at 30.